Agree or disagree? There's so much possibility, potential, and power at your fingertips when you're young. I think I agree. Just Google songs with the word young in the title, and you find a ton of old people who are still trying to be young. And why is that? Because now that they're not, they realize there's a power that only the young have. It might not always feel like that, but the truth is, younger people are often some of the most influential people around. Just think about the power that only the young people in society have as trendsetters and influencers. Consider this: your generation spends up to $143 billion a year. That means you have massive influence on the way that companies are creating, marketing, and selling of products. It was people close to your age who were participating in sit-ins during the civil rights movement in the 60s, and teenagers are advocating to end gun violence in schools today. Louis Braille was 15 years old when he invented Braille and revolutionized the way that visually impaired people interact with the world. But this phase of your life comes with endless possibilities, and you have so much power to influence the way the world works, to invent tools that make life better for other people, and to fight for change in the areas where you see injustice. That's a lot of power. And like Uncle Ben told Peter Parker, that's a Spider-Man reference in case you're lost, with great power comes great responsibility. But you already know that. In fact, some of us feel that every day. You know deep down that being young gives you a ton of potential, and it lays out so many possibilities for you. You've heard for years that you can change the world, and that probably feels really hopeful, but at the same time, it might feel like a lot of pressure. Now, think about how this translates to your faith. When it comes to faith, some of us are being underestimated, right? You ever feel underestimated? Isn't it true that sometimes faith doesn't feel filled with power and possibility like the other things your generation gets to be a part of? I mean, I listed world changing things that people your age have done throughout history, but when it comes to faith, sometimes it can feel like all you're being challenged to do is show up for service, sing a song, hopefully on key, right? Talk to your friends for a few minutes, and then repeat that same routine 52 weeks out of the year. You check off those boxes for 1 hour, 1 day a week, and that's called faith. And you wonder, is that really all there is to it? Right? When it comes to the idea of church and what it means to live out a real faith, some of us just feel like the low expectation is just to show up, and that's a pretty big underestimation of our potential. Others of us may feel overwhelmed by pressure when it comes to faith. Here's what I mean. Maybe the pressure to show up feels like a lot to you, and you feel guilty when you can't be there. Maybe you feel a lot of pressure to follow all the rules so that you don't mess up your reputation as a Christian. Maybe you feel like being a Christian is actually a huge burden instead of something that brings you a ton of joy. When you're young, every other area of your life can feel so full of possibility and power, but sometimes our ideas of faith can feel pretty basic. Now, is Christianity just supposed to be a life of pressure being put on us by other people? Or is it something that we can take ownership of, just like young people have done with so many other things throughout history? And those things wound up changing the world. Can faith be bigger and better than the basic version that we feel pressured to fit into? Well, there's one person in particular who lived a couple of thousand years ago who could definitely relate to being a young person trying to figure out their faith. Now, this guy's name was Timothy. He was a leader in the early Christian church. He was a young guy, most likely younger than many of the other people who were following his lead. We don't know a ton about what he thought about life, but given the fact that he was such a young guy in a leadership position and helping pioneer the early Christian church, we can assume that he probably felt power, pressure, and possibility like we do. Thankfully, he had an incredible mentor in his life whose name was Paul. Paul is one of the most influential people to ever live, and he was the person who wrote most of the second part of the Bible, called the New Testament. What's so cool is that Paul actually took the time to write words of encouragement and advice to Timothy, and we get to read those letters because they're part of the Bible. That's the books of the Bible called 1st and 2nd Timothy. Now, there's one part of the letter that I'd imagine meant so much to Timothy, and it can have a big impact on us today. So check out what Paul wrote to his young friend. Don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set an example for the believers in speech, conduct, in love, in faith, and purity. That's 1 Timothy 4, verse 12. Now put yourself in young Timothy's shoes. It was his job to tell the older people in the church that they couldn't do certain things. It was his job to tell people with more life experience what choices were wise and what choices were not. Oh, and imagine the expectations that people had for him. There totally could have been people just watching his every move, waiting for him to prove that he was too young for his leadership role. How would you feel in that position? Now, Paul, the top dog leader of the day for the church, wrote to Timothy, and he basically says, hey, don't let other people expect less of you, and don't let other people look down on you. Don't let anyone set the bar too low for your life. Now, Paul instead tells Timothy to be an example for other people. Lead the way in all sorts of important areas. Set a high bar for yourself. Paul saw the potential and the power in Timothy's example. Now, Paul told Timothy to set an example in the way that he walked and he talked, the way he behaved, the way he loved others, in his way of trusting God, and in living with healthy boundaries. All of those examples had something in common because they show us that Paul saw something extraordinary in Timothy. And in his second letter to Timothy, he explains a little bit of what that is that he saw. So Paul says, I'm reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and now I'm persuaded lives in you also. And that's 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5. Paul recognized that Timothy had great examples of faith in his life, like his mom and his grandma, but that Timothy also had a genuine faith of his own. See, whether he was being underestimated by others or overwhelmed by misplaced pressure, Timothy understood that his faith was something only he could own. Yes, it may have started as a copy of what he was taught by his mother and his grandmother, but eventually it became his own. And that kind of ownership changed his life. He didn't have to pay attention to the pressure that other people were putting on him because he had a faith of his own. And he owned his faith. And that means that simply he took his faith personally and he took steps to strengthen it. This can be your story too. There's a chance that when it comes to faith, up until this point, you've either felt underestimated or overwhelmed. You felt the pressure that other people have put on you in ways that have caused faith to either feel very basic or to feel like too much to handle. And either way, we learn from the words of Paul and the example of Timothy that you can own your faith. You aren't meant to let the pressure or lack of expectation from other people define the way you relate to God. Just like young people don't wait for permission to change the world, you don't have to wait for permission to make your faith your own. You can follow the example of Jesus and do the things that he did and become more like him, regardless of whether or not you feel underestimated or overwhelmed right now. Now, here's what that looks like, okay? If you're feeling underestimated when it comes to your faith journey, there are a few things that you can do. There are some steps you can take to own your own faith. One of those is to explore what you believe. That means you should ask the questions that you've always had. You should think for yourself and not just take my word or someone else's word for it when it comes to your faith. People like your small group leaders, like me, like Miss Jessica, we're here to help you, but we're not able to own your faith for you. Move to an everyday faith, right? Here's what I mean. It's easy to get in the habit of having a Sunday faith. We know we're supposed to show up at church, we sing the songs, we go through the motions, right? But that might be it. That is a great part of your faith journey, but it's not meant to be the only part. Every day, we get a chance to set an example for other people in how we talk, the way we act, the way we treat each other, and how we connect with God. Maybe your start to an everyday faith just looks like spending time with God every day. Invite other people in. Explore faith with other people. Ask your small group leader for resources to help you grow in your relationship with Jesus. Ask us your questions. You may not know the answers, but we can at least try to figure them out with you, right? Go on the journey to build the faith of your own, not one that's based off of what old people in your life believe. And then check your pressure. Here's something Jesus said. Are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out on religion? Jesus says, come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover that life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you, Jesus says. Keep company with me, and you'll learn how to live freely and lightly. That's Matthew 11:28-30 in the Message version. Now, this is what faith is supposed to feel like. It's not easy, but it's also not supposed to feel like constant pressure. If you feel constant pressure, you need to relax because God's opinion of you isn't based on anything that you're being asked to do. He invites you to rest. Now, if you're feeling underestimated, talk to your small group leader and ask for help finding ways to maximize your potential. See, following Jesus is an invitation to possibility, not pressure. If it feels like possibility, you're probably on the right track. And as you live out all that it is to be young, don't forget that you can have your own faith. During these years of your life, you have the opportunity to set the tone for the rest of your years with the way you practice your faith now. Imagine if your journey with Jesus wasn't based off of someone else's basic expectations or someone else's enormous amount of pressure to perform. Faith isn't always easy, but following Jesus is full of possibilities. So imagine if you begin to own your faith and experience the full life that Jesus promised. Look, I tell you from experience, one day you won't be young. Don't wait until you're older. Don't forget the unique opportunity of this moment. Don't forget the power and the possibility that you have in front of you today.